Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to the XPES Global Teaching Excellence series. We are today in our second webinar talking on the topic of teaching sports, which is a complex and interesting dilemma of whether teaching sports goes from theory to practice or from practice to theory. Before we begin, I would like to inform everyone that the session is being video, and those of you who are not willing to take part in the video, please switch off your camera. My name is Scheinowitz. I'm a professor of exercise physiology, XPES member of the development committee, and I'm from Tel Aviv University in Israel. With me today are three world experts, part of the panel, three panelists, Professor Darlene Kluka from Pretoria and Bari Universities from the US, Professor Timothy Baghurst from Florida State University from the United States, and Professor Ronny Lidor from the Wingate Academic College in Israel. I will start with a brief introduction of the topic. I will then switch the mic to the panelists. Each one has about 10 minutes of presentation, and thereafter we will have an open discussion between the panelists and between and among the participants. So please hold your questions to the end. So when we talk about sports in ancient history, we know that sport was part of the villages, part of the cities, in terms of training and competitions. Everything was mostly practice-based sport. In the past years, we are talking about more than 100 years ago, science has evolved, research questions, empiric investigations, and sports became as knowledge-based as parts of other disciplines. So in terms of historical timeline, we are talking from performance to science. The question is whether can we reverse it, or should we reverse it and go from science to performance? Or it always needs to be from performance to science. This is a little bit more complex because sports disciplines involves different kind of sports, from skill sports, power, endurance, individual sports, group sports, etc., etc. Not only that, we also have different scientific topics that are part of the sports world. It can be part of sports history, psychology, management, nutrition, medicine, etc. But each one can have different amounts of or different proportion of theory and practice. In addition, we have sports that is being taught for children. We have sports that is being taught for adults. And we also have sports as part of primary prevention, for example, to avoid hypertension, diabetes, to recover from a heart attack. And also here, we have probably different proportions from theory to practice. When we teach sports, we have three different disciplines. We have sports coaching. It can be a low national level of coach, it can be an international level of coach, and it can be an Olympic coach. When we teach physical education, it can be undergraduates, it can be graduates with masters in physical education. or it can be under a scientific setting in academia for masters and PhDs. Science. The question is, does one teaching concept apply to all? So with that brief introduction, I would like to invite our first expert, the first panelist, Professor Darlene Kluka. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And while we are waiting for Detlef to bring up her presentation, I would like to thank XP's office, to Detlef and to his team for supporting and helping us to bring that webinar into air.
So, Professor Mickey, I sincerely appreciate this opportunity to be able to participate with XP and WASM and be able to share some information that should present something interesting for all of us. The idea is today to try to see what might be the most appropriate for each of us to be able to get people to learn and perform with graciousness, dignity, and perfection, which is really not possible, but we get close to perfect. That's the goal sometimes. Would you please go to the next slide, sir? So this morning, I'll share with you briefly what I'll speak with you about. For theoreticians, practitioners, some definitions, foundational theories, evidence-based practice, bridging the gap, and reflective practice. So if you would go to the next one, please. So here we have a couple of ideas, and theoreticians, which generally default worldwide to people who are in sports science, or at least scientists historically, and how to apply that theory to practice. That's what they're looking for. And then when applying that theory, how can that lead to better theory? And for practitioners who are truly the people on what we would consider to be the front line of what we do, what is the value of theory? And is that value of involving theoreticians in your work? Are you doing that? Are you not doing that? And what could be the benefits? Next slide, please. So we have some definitions, and I'm hoping that these fit in with what the rest of us are sharing with you. And it's a set of ideas, the theory, to explain some aspect of the human experience. And in our case, that has to do through sport, physical education, physical activity, etc. And we're looking at mostly thoughts and behaviors. And please remember that as we look at these things, we're really having to look at performance, which is the act at a moment in time. And so by looking at theory and learning theory, it lets us understand practice. And it's relatively easy to learn and most memorable and meaningful according to the research literature that we have. There's also practice. And so we have three areas that we look at. One is research. What is going on and how do we answer some questions that practitioners and theorists come up with. Clinical, working with the students and athletes in terms of their interventions or their assessment. And then reflective, which appears to me to be a relatively newer area of the concern, which has to do about thinking about our experiences and what can we learn from The next page, please. All right, so we have some foundational theories, and I just picked out a few because we have a time constraint. But the first one, way back in 1961, it was called the Bobo doll. Can you imagine? The Bobo doll. I used to have a dog that I named Bobo. At any rate, this has to do with children's behavior, and it doesn't relate specifically to sport, but I think you can get the idea with no problem. The children acted aggressively toward a doll when they watched adults being aggressive to the doll. So what does that tell us? In general, that people's behavior could have a tendency to influence how we behave. There's also a whole new, relatively new area of neuroplasticity. This means that even when you're my age, gray and years old, that we can reorganize the brain as we learn. And that's got to do with chemicals and neurons that support our short-term memory. So if you have a look and what I put down on the slide, there are going to be many things in the future that we will look at in terms of biomarkers. In other words, we may be able to, if we look through neurology and neuroscience, be able to match some interventions with people specifically. And this is something that when I went to school way back in the previous century, for one of my degrees, we had no idea because the technology was not well enough developed. So another area that we want to look into is the neuroscience, because as we begin to learn more about the brain, and by the way, we know less about our brain and how it functions for sport, let alone anything else, than we do about sending a person to Mars. So it must be matches between learners and teachers, which means that neuroscience has the opportunity for us to be able to truly individualize people's learning and performance. And then there's a hypothesis that deals with an action plan. And so we have to look at what that means, and is random practice better than block practice, etc. And so we'll see a little bit, I hope, through what we're doing this morning. It's my morning, Entschuldigung, that promotes better cognitive effect across practices. Next slide, please. There's also a concept that's called evidence-based practice, and I think at least one of my colleagues will mention this. There are many in an open environment. There are many skills and versions of the same skill that we can use, including variations of each skill. And so if we're in a more closed environment, such as a balance beam routine in gymnastics, there's probably one most effective and efficient way in which to move to be successful for each person. Multiple skills in a random order practice, however, looks to be something that will provide us with long-term situations so that we're able to adjust and adapt those kinds of things based upon how our neuronal components fit into the picture. So these questions are something that people will ask themselves as they're looking at what are they getting as a result of their practices. Next slide, please. All right, so I have a little bit of bridging the gap because I don't want to leave you with only theory. I want us to kind of see how we can put this together. So where the environment is dynamic, and that means more of an open skill environment, and the person is required to adapt to their surroundings, Random practice schedules are better than blocked, and random means, well, this comes and then that comes. And blocked, you do the same thing over and over again. So as an example, if I'm coaching gymnastics and I'm doing balance beam, I may want to have more of a blocked practice because this is repetitive to get it to near perfection, as opposed to something like volleyball, where the every play is going to be something that will be randomized. And that ultimately, although it takes longer, ultimately will be for better retention of those skills. Observation influence overall motor skill acquisition. And I'm talking about this from the coach to the participant, but I'm also talking about this for you as the observer as it relates to what you're providing feedback with. And many times we forget about that completely, that observation that we can do that's qualitative, of course. And then the closer the practice environment is to the actual game, the higher the likelihood of transfer. So if we can simulate small pieces of practice that will look like an actual game or look like an actual competition, and by the way, that includes vision and hearing, and also the kinesthetics of things, the feel of the environment. And then anticipation and decision-making involves blocked and random practice. And we shall see how that goes. Now, what we're talking about here in terms of bridging the gap is we're talking about overall theory or concepts, and then we're having a look to see how can we take those and make a difference for our athletes. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this will be I think, the last slide. What's a reflective practice? Well, you pay attention to the values and the theories which inform actions by examining the practice. So what this means is when you're finished with the practice, you reflect on this. You ask yourself questions that will help guide not only that practice, but for future practices. You also might want to seriously consider giving this opportunity to your students and your athletes. Next slide, please. These are some references that I used to prepare for this. And I would assume that, Prof. Mickey, we would maybe provide these PowerPoints for those who are looking at the at this morning or this afternoon with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kluka. Thank you very much, Darlene. I'm happy now to switch to Professor Tim Baghurst. Tim is with us. Tim, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I want to take a different approach to maybe what was expected of me, in the sense that I'm going to argue that we sometimes go a little too far into the theory and forget the people who are actually carrying out the sport. And I'm going to argue that we have become very focused on specific areas within our sport. We've become siloed within our sport. And as a consequence, we've developed theories that have not necessarily carried over into the application of sport. And the reason I'm talking about this is from the perspective of somebody who teaches coaches, who works with coaches, and also coaches. So this is a real focus on coaching rather than physical education. I was a physical education teacher, but now I work primarily with coaches. So I want to talk about range and how that really impacts how we apply and the theories we develop. But first, I thought it was important that we actually talk about what is sport or what is sports. And there's a variety of different definitions. This is a common one: an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. I thought the entertainment section there was interesting, that it's for entertainment purposes. I don't play sports for entertainment. I play sports to win. But anyway, and the other thing I wanted to point out is this is the use of the word sport over time. And you can see that since the 1950s, we have become very interested in sport. It is popular. It is something people want to know more about. And what you'll find is that when we talk about theories in sport, we also see that theories have been developed over that time as well. As interest in sports has increased, so has the interest in improving sports, improving athleticism, improving performances, etc. And then also, what is a coach? And you can see there's a variety of different options: training or instructing, teaching, prompting or urging with instructions. And again, you can see that coaching, the word coach or coaching, has increased in how much it's being used in our society today. So these are important topics because people are talking about them. They have relevancy. So this has already almost been mentioned in some way, but I want to argue that coaching itself it's an umbrella term for covering many different disciplines. And a lot of us aren't experts in all of these disciplines, and these are just a few: exercise science, sociology, strength and conditioning, etc. But when we talk about taking theories and applying them, we have to understand that those of us who work in sports, we have a responsibility to have a lot of knowledge across different areas. And unfortunately, most of us have not been trained in those areas. So when we look at theories to application, we may be taking theories from one area that may contradict another area because we don't know that area very well. And so as a coach, as somebody who teaches physical education, we need a broad base of knowledge in order to make those applications. Some theories, of course, may cross different disciplines, but I would argue that the way we structure our training, the way we in club sports, in professional sports, and also in universities, we tend not to train people to have a broad-based knowledge. We train them to be very specific. As an example, when I was a university student in England, I did my degree in sports science, but after the first year, I specialized in sports psychology. So I took very little biomechanics, very little strength and conditioning, very little sports nutrition. And as a consequence, what may work in those areas, I don't know, because I've been specialized and I'm working in one area. So coaching itself, you could argue, is an umbrella term for all of these areas. And within those areas, each one will have their own theories. Each one will have their own application. But sometimes there's no connection. A good example might be strength and conditioning, crossing over to sports nutrition. If you have a theory in nutrition, you have a theory in strength and conditioning, they may oppose each other if you don't know both. Now, how does this translate? We need to understand that theory is in its essence a test, a model, an idea. It is not something that we prove as right or wrong. And I think Darlene explained this well, just showing how diverse we are as people. We all work differently. We all understand things differently. We all can translate that knowledge differently. We have practice and we have theory, and we have this continual cycle. And you can see my arrows are going both directions. Because if we put something into practice in our sport, we reflect on whether it worked or not. And that reflection allows us to develop a theory. I wonder if I did this again, what would happen if I did this? Then that theory creates some new application method. I'm going to change the way I train based on what I reflected on here and the theory I developed. And then I put that back into practice. So we have this clockwise circle where we go from practice, this is what I do, this is what I thought worked and what didn't work, this is why I think it did or didn't work, I wonder if I can change it here and then put it back into practice. The flip side, we can come up with a theory. I think that we should try this. I wonder how it would work. Let's put it into practice and then change how it applies. So we see practice leads to theory, theory leads to practice, and ultimately the outcomes are the result of going both ways. So to say that one leads to the other and the other, one leads to the other as a priority, I don't think that works. It's asking which came first, the chicken or the egg. It doesn't make sense. Both work in tandem with each other and go in both directions. There we go. Yep, sorry about that. So when we look at theory and practice, there is a big difference between them. We have theoreticists in sport who may not understand how it works in practice. I've attended sessions by coaching theorists, by sport theorists, and I walk out going, I don't know that you've ever been on a field or in a court to see whether this would even work or how you would put this into practice. Vice versa, I've seen people who coach or teach sports who have no idea or no rationale or no logic to explain why they do what they do. And both are dangerous. Both are dangerous. You have to understand there is a significant difference between somebody who's just creating that theory, somebody who's creating practice without theory. The two need to work in tandem together. We can take theory and put it into practice, and we can take practice and put it into theory. But, and I think this is very key for those of us who teach in this world, the theory must translate into something that results in better practice, whether it be more consistency, whether it be a more efficient practice or training, whether it be more success. If we just create theory and we don't test that theory through practice, why are we creating theory? Conversely, if we just practice and we don't really have a theory or rationale for why, then maybe we lose that consistency or efficiency or success because it's not done every day or every season. We need to account for that umbrella to be applied. A theoreticist, again, if we go back to specialty, and to look at how do we, I think this may work based on this. Okay, but when we look at the umbrella at the top right and we think of all those disciplines that you need to factor into your theory for sports, if you don't factor in everything, will it work in practice? If we've developed a theory in motor learning, but we have no connection to nutrition or biomechanics or exercise physiology, will it work? That's the question that theorists have to ask. Unfortunately, most people who teach sports worldwide do a lot of application without necessarily the theory behind it. And so, again, the two are going to be a blend. And I want to leave you with a quote. And this is a story. I was reading The History of the Gene. I'm not finished. It's a massive book. But I came across this phrase here, or this paragraph here, and I just want to read it. The author, this is talking about Charles Darwin. Okay, Darwin came up with a theory, and he published the theory. And this was a comment from that. The author of the review was an unlikely critic of Darwin's work, a mathematician, engineer, and inventor from Edinburgh named Fleming Jenkin, who had rarely written about biology. Brilliant and abrasive, Jenkin had diverse interests in linguistics, electronics, mechanics, arithmetic, physics, chemistry, and economics. He'd read widely and profusely. Dickens, Dumas, Austin, Eliot, Newton, Malthus, Lamarck. Having chanced upon Darwin's work, Jenkin read it thoroughly, worked swiftly through the implications, and immediately found a fatal flaw in the argument. This is somebody who was not a biologist. This is somebody who had expertise in many things around biology. He had expertise under the umbrella. When we work with people, when we try to develop theory, we have to have that broad base, just like Jenkins, to allow us to see the big picture, to allow us to see how theories maybe apply, do or don't work. Without that, we become maybe Darwin, who knew biology very well, but couldn't see how that fit in the broader world. So there's a challenge for us who maybe teach theory of sport or something along those realms, where we have to look beyond that and see the bigger picture in order to develop applications that really work. That's everything for me. This is obviously for the recording, but here is my information if you have questions. We also do a coach newsletter, which I encourage people to subscribe to. And we interview people from sports about topics like these on a YouTube channel as well. But that's all for me. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. It was fantastic. I will be happy to switch now to Professor Ronny Lidor. Ronny, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mickey. Good afternoon from Tel Aviv City. Before I present some of my ideas associated with the topic and the question of this webinar, how to teach sport, I would like to thank Professor Mickey Scheinowitz for the invitation to be part of this webinar. Thank you, Mickey. And maybe a little bit in contrast of what we've heard during the last great talk this webinar, I would like to argue that in order to teach effectively sport, mainly sport skills or motor skills, from both open and closed perspectives, I would argue that the best way to do it, as I have colored some words in my title, in the title of this webinar, is from theory to practice. And actually what I would like to do is to emphasize the importance of evidence-based practice, namely that every part, every segment, every strategy, method, or technique that coaches use during their practice sessions, during the training program, should be evidence-based. And I would like to mention briefly, before discussing very briefly a number of theories from motor learning and sports psych perspectives, and then to talk about some ideas which are generated from this theory, I would like to mention very new books that I think can illustrate clearly the association between theory and practice. And the first book is by John Toner, Barbara Montestro, and the late Aden Moran, published in 2022. And this author examined the topic of continuous improvements, intertwining mind and body in athletic expertise. A great book that put together the association between theory and practice. The next two books were written by one author, by Rob Gray from Arizona State University. And the first book, published about a year ago, entitled How We Learn to Move, a Revolution in the Way We Coach and Practice Sport Skills. And once again, this is a good example of how to put together theory and practice, and how coaches can benefit from theoretical information. And the third book by the same author, just published a few months ago. In this book, Professor Gray took one step forward the ideas that he had presented in his 2021 book, and he's focusing on learning to optimize movement, harnessing the power of the athlete's environment relationship. And of course, there are some other resources and some other books, articles, etc., that emphasize how much important it is to use evidence-based practice. What happened with my slides? Stuck. Let me fix it. Okay.
Maybe Ronny, you want to switch to slide presentation mode.
Yeah, I did it, but okay.
Now it's a slide no presentation mode.
Excuse me, Mickey?
No, keep going. Okay.
Yes, I'm trying, but okay, sorry. Okay, so based on these references as well as in others, as Darlene had mentioned, there are a number of theories and models, at least in the area of motor learning and sports psychology, that coaches can use ideas and themes which have been generated from these theories. So if I look the literature during the last 5 decades, I can mention here a classical theory by Schmidt, the schema theory, proposed in 1975, and 10 years later, the constraint model proposed by Carl Newell. And I think that these two theories did a great job helping coaches to organize their practice and to apply some good ideas in perspective of motor learning, skill acquisition, etc. And based on these theories and model, a number of models and theories, to my opinion, maybe new one, generated by Masters investment theory in 92, and particularly the nonlinear pedagogy and the constant led approach generated by Cho and colleague and Renshaw and colleague. And in these theories, once again, I think very nice association between practice and theory, or between theory and practice, can be observed. And when we talk about practice, about skill acquisition, about motor learning, etc., a number of terms should be mentioned. And we typically talk about performance and learning, acquisition, retention, or transfer. And recently, the fourth aspect discussed by Gray in his last book, we can talk about perceiving, acting, adapting, and strengthening of content done in practice sessions. And I colored in green, very important to me, processes, mechanisms that I think theory can enhance and strengthen. The first is learning, what we call the later phases of skill acquisition. The second is transfer, a phase or a stage where the athlete is actually required to use knowledge from practice to game, from practice to competition, from practice to real life situations. And the third concept is adaptation, namely, again, a phase that the athlete is required to adapt his or her skills to a new situation, to a new phase during the game or competition, etc. So I think that every coach, every instructor, every teacher who teaches sports desire to enhance learning, transfer, and adaptation during his or her practice regime or training session. So what I've learned during the last, I believe, 2 decades from reading theory is that in this case of skill acquisition, Specialization is a must to be skillful. There's no doubt about it. However, today, according to the recent theories, this is not the case. Skillful behavior is not rote, repetitive, and automatic. It is adaptive, responsive, and intelligent. And the new theories that can be applied during practice, during training, can help coaches to shift their thoughts from the specialization aspect to a more varied, adaptive manner of practice. So I would like to argue that if we use current theories in sport, we can view skill as involving adaptive, variable, and problem solvers. Okay. I'll do it one more time. I have 2 more slides, Mickey. Okay, so what I would like to emphasize that we need today, based on current theories, maybe to develop a new way of thinking because of the new theories, namely that we need to be more accepting of different ways of doing things. And we have to increase our awareness of the task constraint of every skill, every task that we teach in sport. And when I'm talking about task constraint, I'm talking about factors that are highly specific to the skill being performed. And I'm talking based on the new theories about the ecological validity of our practice today, namely that we have to increase the ecological validity of practice based on the recent theories. In addition, we have to increase the variability of practice of both closed tasks as well as open tasks. So when I say that I would like to argue that it is important, and maybe more important, okay, to teach from theory to practice, actually I mean that we need to let performers explore, try things out, and let them find solutions that work for them. And if I have to summarize this short talk, I think that we can learn today from theories how to use pedagogy of chaos. And I'm using this concept from education. So to me, maybe the best way to encourage coaches to increase their knowledge is to help them to approach new theories by actually looking at some practical ways of teaching and coaching. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Ronny. I think that we heard very interesting concepts by Professor Darlene Kluka, by Professor Tim Baghurst, and Professor Ronny Lidor. I would like to bring up at least maybe 1 or 2 things that came up through your presentation before I open it for questions from the audience. First of all, maybe I'll ask Darlene. I think that what I learned from your presentation is that we can train the brain for knowledge. And we know that we can train the brain for health against dementia, Parkinson's diseases, and so on, all the neurodegenerative diseases. training the brain for knowledge might be very interesting and important in addition to training our muscles in order to improve performance, fitness. Is there any correlation between the two that you are aware of in terms of those two training modalities?
Well, thank you for the question or the perspective. This has always been the challenge, and as I see it, continues to be the challenge. Historically, exercise physiology, followed by biomechanics, followed by sports psychology, and followed by motor learning, motor behavior, etc., have been the ways in which most of the areas that we're concerned with, or the disciplines we're concerned with, have been developed. That said, we will find a plethora of literature on exercise physiology, but it's very tunneled and not looking at the bigger picture, as Tim and Ronny had indicated. So the challenge for all of us is to be able to find a way in which people do not get tunneled into looking at exercise physiology or sports psychology as independent agencies. And the challenge for me as a coach always was, you spend phenomenal amounts of time preparing the body, in other words, the muscles, all of the things that go into that. You spend tremendous time doing that. And there has yet to be, in my knowledge, and I'm sure those of you who are proficient in exercise physiology can contest this, but what I found is that just because you make someone stronger or more flexible, et cetera, it does not automatically mean that they're going to be better skilled or in performance situations be able to select the right program in order to run the right kinds of things. And so I personally am not aware of anything that has been researched and or published that connects those two directly. Conversely, most of my work has been in the area of visual perception and sport, just because, again, you train the visual system to be able to make quicker decisions that could be right and appropriate, does not automatically mean that they're going to have better performance. So I wish I could give you a concrete answer. In my knowledge, that is still one of those many challenging situations. Perhaps someone else can attend to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Darlene. Very interesting perspective on that question. I would like to bring up to Tim and Ronny. First of all, one concept is, in my opinion, what is the percentage of time that a coach, for example, or anyone involves theory during a daily walk? Like if you are working with an athlete, how much theory your work involves on a daily basis? Like 10%, 3%, or 90%? Does it make this specific coach a better coach? Or it doesn't matter? So this is one thing. The other thing is, if we leave the school for coaches, physical education, and university setting, and 20 years later, we want a continuing education, is it important for a coach, for a teacher, for a scientist to improve knowledge over time? Where will we get that from? From the stadium? From practical aspects or theory? I'll be happy to hear your comments on that. Tim, Ronny, please, whoever is ready to take the floor.
Well, those are big questions. and I don't know that I can give you an answer in just a couple minutes. I cannot speak to the entire world, the entire world of sports. I can speak to what is happening in the USA. And I will tell you that the vast, vast majority of coaches use almost no theory in their practice. And that is, and Darlene's nodding her head, she knows. The vast number of coaches in the United States have almost zero training. The training that they learn is from what their previous coach did, what they did as an athlete, what they've talked to their friends, their colleagues about. That is where they get their theory. Is that a problem? Yes. And we see a lot of poor coaching in the United States. We see a lot of athletes underperforming, becoming injured, burning out. We also see a lot of coaches experiencing those same problems, underperforming and burning out. And I would argue it's because they do not have any or very, very little theory to support why they do what they do. The other problem behind this, and this is something I teach in our program, is you have to be able to answer why. Why are you doing this training? Why are you planning your program this way for practice? If you cannot answer those questions, then you don't have theory to support you. You're just making it up based on what you think is best. That creates a problem. Over time, we're seeing improvement in coach education in the United States, but it's still very, very limited. And most coach education programs in the United States don't teach what Darlene was talking about, connections. They teach tactics. They teach training, primarily physical training. Technique and tactics are primary in most NGBs, national governing bodies. They do not teach the theory behind why we do what we do. They don't connect the psychology. They don't connect the sociology in very, very limited fashion. And so as a consequence, these coaches know very well how to kick a ball. They know very well, if we're playing soccer, to run a 4-4-3. But they don't understand why two teammates aren't working well together, or why that athlete who has practiced all week then goes into a performance and does the complete opposite of what they've practiced, because they haven't been trained on why all of this works together. To your second question, in my program, we run a master's in coaching online. The average age of our coach is probably in the mid-30s, which is unusual. Most master's programs are very young. You finish your undergraduate degree, you go on and do your master's. We've actually found that coaches are coming to our program after 10 years of coaching going, I need to know more, which is exciting. The problem is we are just a small program among 100,000 coaches who all need this training. So we must continually develop. We must, as I talked about with range, we must continually try to learn from different areas to see how they apply. Tying in with what Darlene said, I'll just finish with this. I was once working with an exercise physiologist who was doing a study, had athletes come in, run on the treadmill, the usual thing. And there was an athlete who wasn't performing well. And the professor said, I don't understand. Why is this happening? The training protocol should work. Their post-test is lower than their pre-test. What's going on? I said, well, have you done any other additional testing? What do you mean? Have you asked them about their emotional well-being to find out? No, why would I do that? This is the problem we have with the disconnect between the different groups not understanding that one impacts the other. Because if that athlete had a fight with their girlfriend or boyfriend the day before, they will not perform well that morning. And as if we don't understand those connections, the whys, then we create theories that are perhaps inaccurate. That physiologist may create a theory based on the results of that study that are flawed because they didn't have a broad-based knowledge.
Okay,
I'll
excellent.
leave it to Dr. Ronny to continue.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. I liked your comments and perspective on that very much. Ronny, with your permission, let's open the floor.
Mickey, can I add only one sentence? Can I add only one sentence to what Tim has just said?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I totally agree with Tim that coaches lack knowledge about theories. I do agree. In the United States, there is no formal coaching education, or there is formal coaching education, but it is not required. However, in Israel, for example, although we are a small country, every coach should be certified. Every coach should go to school for 1 year, once a week, one day every week for 1 year to pick up his knowledge about coaching. However, I totally agree with Tim that most coaches lack knowledge about theory, and this is the reason that I think that this is our role, our task, to disseminate foundations of theories across sports, individual sports and team sports. This is the reason that I pick up the approach how we teach sport from theory to practice, because I think that coaches should understand, foundations of theories. And Mickey, you say that 20 years from now, if we terminate and close every program, well, I think that the knowledge is there, is outside. There are many books written in popular manner for coaches to pick up this education. So to me, the most important thing is how to educate coaches to use theories, because they don't like to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ronny. We almost end the hour of the webinar. Let me maybe open one question from the audience. If someone would like to pick up the mic, open the mic and bring a question up.
Mickey, I'm watching the chat, and Detlef had put a question. I think what he's saying is, let's see, will AI lead to better coaching because of a more efficient application of theories? I think that would be an exciting one to listen to, particularly have people's thoughts on how they see AI developing to assist.
Darlene, excellent question. I just prepared one slide by wrapping up this webinar. I went to open AI ChatGPT and I asked the question, what is the ideal approach of teaching sports? And
you are so clever. Good for you.
And the answer was that the ideal approach for teaching sports can vary depending on the individual learner and the specific sport being taught. However, in general, it is usually more effective to begin with practical instruction and gradually introduce theoretical concepts as the learner progresses. I think that with that, I thank our three experts for the time, for being with us, for enlightening us with that interesting topic of teaching sports. Thank you all for participating in this XPES event of Global Teaching Excellence, and have a wonderful weekend.